And now I'm going to, again, welcome back again, Sid Chawla. Sid, are you there for us?
I'm here.
All righty, fantastic. Sid, I will go ahead and hand the presentation over to you. And anyone has any questions, please sir, keep sending them over to the chat. Thank you very much.
Okay, Charles, are you able to see my screen?
Yep, you see your presentation there. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Today we'll be discussing about SAML authentication with GlobalProtect. All right, let's start. So GlobalProtect SAML authentication. So today our agenda will be SAML. We'll be discussing how SAML works, then GlobalProtect SAML authentication flow, troubleshooting guidelines, and then we'll talk about resources. So SAML stands for Security Assertion Markup Language. It's an XML-based open standard for transferring identity data between two parties, that's which is an identity provider and a service provider. When we talk about Global Protect, service provider is always the firewall where we have portal and gateway configured, and the identity provider is a third party IDP that could be Okta, Azure, or any other identity provider. So IDP performs authentication and passes the user's identity to the service provider. Service provider trusts the identity provider and authorizes the given user to access requested resources. So SAML mainly solves two requirements in the enterprise: web-based single sign-on across multiple entities and federated identity. Single sign-on is achieved by sharing identity information between multiple organizations and applications, and federated identity allows a set of service providers to agree on a way to refer to a single user. It has some benefits. It improves user experience. SAML enables single sign-on by allowing user to authenticate to an identity provider and then access service providers without additional authentication. It also increases the security. It provides a single point of authentication which happens at a secure IDP. Then SAML transfers the identity information to the service provider. So components of SAML SSO solution. We have three entities participate in a SAML transaction. Principal, that's the user or the end user machine where you have Global Protect application installed. Service provider, also known as SP, which will be your firewall where you deploy gateway and portal. And identity provider, that's your IDP. So service provider is typically the application or the service that the principal has requested to access. And the identity provider is the entity that is plugged into the identity store that carries the user's credential. SAML does not define a technique that an IDP can use to authenticate the user. It actually focuses on defining the exchange of information between SP and an IDP to indicate the authentication and authorization state of the principal. This gives IDP the freedom to use additional authentication techniques to authenticate the user. So as I mentioned earlier, SAML message uses XML as data interchange format and are transported over HTTP with a strong requirement to secure these messages using SSL or TLS. That's basically HTTPS protocol. Just want to let you know if you have any questions in between, you can type it in the chat and we'll try to answer it through the chat only right now.
As they come up, Sid, I'll be sure to feed them to you. No problem.
All right, thank you. So SAML assertion. SAML assertion contains information about authentication and the user. The assertion contains information that the receiver can use to make an access control decision. There are three types of assertion statements. Authentication statement, which actually contains the information such as method, and time used to ensure identity of the user. Next, attribute statement, which contains information about the user such as username, phone number, address, etc. And the third one, authorization decision statement, which confirms if the user is authorized to access a specified resource. Also, I want to share SAML uses security tokens containing assertions to pass information about a principal, which is actually the end user, between the SAML authority and an identity provider. For instance, identity provider asserts that user has been authenticated and has given associated attributes. In SAML, identity provider, also known as SAML authorities and asserting parties. Service providers, also known as relying parties, due to the fact that they rely on the information provided by the identity provider. Identity provider forwards accession to the accession consumer service URL, which is also known as ACS URL. And this service validates the assertion to ensure whether the end user is authorized to gain access to the application and other resources. So ACS URL is important because that is the URL where service provider will receive and consume assertions. The lower level communication or messaging protocols, which can be HTTP or SOAP, that contains SAML message can be transmitted over are defined by bindings. So SAML bindings are hooks on an endpoint that dictates how an SP and IDP communicate. With HTTPS transport, typical bindings
Excuse me,
include
Sid. Sid, I apologize for interrupting. Looks like your slide didn't change from what we're seeing here.
this is not in the slide.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we're just still seeing the sample assertion. It seemed like you were moving on to a different subject. I apologize.
Okay. Yeah, I was sharing some information. Okay. Let me continue. Okay. So I was talking about SAML requests and responses transmitted via HTTP redirect have SAML request and SAML response query string parameter respectively before it is sent. Before it's sent, the message is deflated, base64 encoded and URL encoded in the order, and upon receipt, the process is reversed to recover original message. Both SPs and IDPs can transmit and receive messages using redirect or post binding. Okay, so let's talk about use cases for SAML. So uh, we have we can use SSO for GlobalProtect, we can use SSO for captive portal, and we can use SSO for firewall and Panorama GUI. When we talk about GlobalProtect, customer would like to use SAML-based SSO for GlobalProtect. SAML allows these enterprise to use single architecture for SSO across all applications, for all the users, and on all the device platforms. GlobalProtect runs on multiple platforms, and since SAML is platform agnostic, it is the perfect choice for single sign-on. GP Gateways and Portal will act as SAML service provider, that's SP, deferring the process of identity assertion to a third-party SAML identity provider. Similarly, SSO can be used for captive portal, and SSO can be used for firewall and Panorama GUI login as well. So SAML, GlobalProtect SAML authentication flow. In GlobalProtect SAML authentication, portal and gateway act as a service provider. So we have always an SP initiated login. GP client requests access to GP portal. Firewall will generate a SAML request and redirect the client to the IDP. Client authenticates against IDP. IDP will return SAML assertion and redirect client back to the GP portal gateway ACS URL. GP client forwards the SAML assertion to the firewall, and firewall will validate the assertion, extract the username, return SAML pre-login cookie and the username to the GP client. GP client will use the pre-login cookie to resume the first session and proceed with the portal gateway connection. So typically, three entities participate in SAML transaction. One entity is the user, or we can call it as principal. The second entity is the service provider, the IDP, and the third is service provider, the firewall, and the third is identity provider, that's IDP. Service provider typically application or service that the principal has requested access to. In our case, when we talk about GlobalProtect, it's the firewall, and the IDP is the entity that is plugged into the identity store that carries user's credential. Okay, SAML does not define any technique that an IDP can use to authenticate the user. Instead, it focuses on defining the exchange of information between SP and IDP to indicate the authentication and authorization state of the principal. So this gives IDP freedom to use additional authentication techniques, which can be 2FA or MFA or CERT-based authentication as well to authenticate the user. So this is a flow between client portal and IDP, how a client will initiate a connection. So client where GP application is installed uses a TLS to connect to portal gateway. Here we'll see post pre-login ESP message. Then from the firewall, we'll see a response with a SAML redirect message pointing to the IDP. Then from the browser on the client, it will start a new TLS connection with an IDP. Here, IDP will validate the client credentials and send the result in a SAML assertion payload along with a redirect message, sending the browser back to the portal gateway's ACS URL. Browser will start a separate connection towards portal gateway ACS URL and submit the SAML assertion. Once the firewall receives the SAML assertion, it will validate the assertion and return a SAML pre-login cookie and the username. GP resumes the portal gateway TLS session and it will use the SAML pre-login cookie received by the GP via the browser to authenticate itself, and user will be able to connect to the GlobalProtect application. In our case, I have a lab setup where I'll demonstrate. We have used IDP Okta, and on the firewall, we have deployed gateway and portal. So we have it on the same firewall. Okay, so firewall will validate the SAML assertion using the certificate of the IDP, which has the public key. Validating the assertion doesn't mean the firewall validates the IDP certificate. So let's talk about configuration. Okay, I have configured SAML on Okta developer page. If you want to test, if you have a lab, you can always create an account on Okta developer and then create your uh, SAML configuration over there. So I have an account on Okta. Under application, I've deployed GlobalProtect. So when you deploy GlobalProtect, you can define SAML configuration over here. Here under the app setting. So this is this URL. When we were talking about the application, so IDP returning portal gateways ACS URL, and the browser starts a separate connection towards the portal gateway ACS URL. This is the URL which will be shared by IDP to the GP application. So I'm using the default configuration over here. This is the metadata information. When we talk about configuring on firewall under device, we have something called SAML identity provider. So you can import the metadata information through this URL. So if I try to access this, this is the metadata file. I can save it in XML and then I can import it on the firewall. So I can browse the file and import it and name it whatever I want to name it. Here, I have defined it as GP SAML, and this is the metadata file, and this is the information shared by the IDP to the metadata. Once you have defined your SAML configuration, you have to define an authentication profile for it. So in my firewall, under authentication profile, I have defined this GP auth profile. Type is SAML. When you're defining GP, you can use any other type as well, but as we are talking about SAML, I've selected SAML.
Is it possible to zoom in a little bit?
Yeah, sorry.
Thanks.
So yeah, so under authentication profile, I have something called IDP server profile as well. Let's see. Sorry. Okay, here I've defined SAML. This is the IDP server profile. This is the same server profile under SAML where I have called the metadata, and under advanced I have allowed all users, but then the users which are defined on the SAML, that will be only allowed. But if you want to restrict, you can also define those users over here instead of using all. So the username attributes for SAML from IDP, I'm using username. You can use any other username as well. Username attribute like SAM account or any other thing. And once I have the authentication profile and SAML identity provider configuration set up, I also need to define a certificate. So this is the certificate. Once I uploaded the metadata, it got uploaded on the firewall. And this is the certificate which I'll be used for GlobalProtect. This I've defined it on the firewall. You can get it signed by a third party signing authority as well and call it on the firewall. But here, this is being generated on the firewall itself. And then I do have an SSL TLS profile. This is my SSL profile where I've called the GP certificate. This SSL profile, I'll be using it in the GP configuration portal or gateway. And as I have this firewall, I have defined portal and gateway both on the same firewall. It depends on the configuration. A lot of customers have portal and gateway defined on different firewalls as well. So in my case, this is my portal configuration. So let me show my topology as well. Okay, this is the topology which I'm using. I have a PC which is connected via switch to the firewall, and it is connected on Ethernet 1/1. So Ethernet 1/1 is the gateway for this PC, and Ethernet 1/3 is the egress interface that is connected to the ISP. The PC's IP here is 10.10.10.10 and gateway is 10.10.10.1. Ethernet 1/1 is 10.10.10.1. So on the portal, I'm the gateway is 1/1, so user will be connecting to 1/1 and will try to access portal on 1/1. So interface 1/1 under the network setting. If I go under authentication, the SSL profile where I've called the GP certificate have been called over here. And then under portal, under authentication, I've defined client authentication. I've named it as portal auth because this is for portal authentication. And the authentication profile I'm using is for the SAML is GP auth profile. Under agent, I've defined this agent. And then under, as I'm using gateway as external, I've defined it under the external configuration and I've named it as gateway address as well. So this is the basic portal configuration you should have in order to access portal. Then we need to define gateway. This is the gateway I've defined. I'm hosting gateway on the gateway and portal on the same firewall. So I have defined it on the same interface 1/1. I'm using the same certificate profile here. You can use different certificate profile as well. And this is my client authentication profile. I've named it as gateway auth, and I'm using the same SAML identity provider configuration over here. Under agent, I'm using tunnel mode. And if I go under client setting, I have defined it to use 172.16.10.0 20/24 pool. So once user is able to authenticate to GlobalProtect, he should be able to get one of the IPs of this pool. So basic configuration for portal gateway. This is the basic configuration. A user when configuring portal gateway with SAML should have this as minimum configuration. And also along with this, you should also have the required security policies to access GlobalProtect gateway or GlobalProtect portal on the firewall itself. If you do not have it, you may not be able to connect. So make sure other configuration to allow access for gateway and portal should be there on the firewall. So first,
Sid, we did have a couple of questions come up. Devin is asking if you can leverage SAML groups to assign specific IP pools for GPVPN, say IT admins at 10.10 and sales at 10.20 and so on.
1 second. Specific IP pools for GPVPN. Yes, you can define specific IP pools for GPVPN as well. So you can define it under, let me just go back. When we talk about gateway, so you define it under client setting, you define a client. So you can define multiple clients over here, and as per the groups or the users, they can connect and they can get IPs from different pools as well.
Okay. Cool.
Michael, yes, portal and gateway can be defined on different devices as well. You can define portal on one firewall and gateways on different firewalls in different regions as well. Portal is only used to retrieve gateway configuration from the firewall, and then as per the distance or the best distance available between gateways, it will connect to the required gateway. For example, if a user is present in India and he's connecting to gateway, if the gateways are in different continents, the user will be able to connect to the gateway present in Asia. Specific configuration into SAML authentication. You don't have any specific configuration for iOS devices. It is actually the same. You may have to think about how to import the certificate on iOS devices because that's a different. Also, you can use MDM solution to deploy GP app on iOS devices.
And that last question was, yeah, the answer is being directed to you, Joseph, just so you're aware. Okay.
Okay, and Maria, you don't need to upload search separately because once I uploaded metadata, I'm talking about specific for IDP certificate. Once I uploaded metadata, this IDP certificate came with metadata. So I'm talking about this certificate. So this was actually already on the firewall once I imported metadata from IDP.
Okay.
Okay, Manglai, I am not talking about Enter ID for GP right now. So maybe you can reach out to us separately.
Okay, yeah, so
Okay,
for Ming,
yeah.
just so you know, we will have a post-discussion location in live community after this event's over where the videos will be posted, these recordings. If you want to continue those conversations afterwards, we can always bring those up there as well, too.